Dave. Just a heads up, the live stream is running. I love that I always have to give that heads up there with this group because I never know what you're going to say. Oh boy. Yes, I feel like you warned me about that, but it hasn't really gotten bad until the last 2 weeks. I don't know if we just don't care.
We just don't care.
Maybe that's the case. Yeah.
I think we're just ready to get out.
All right. You'll have a few minutes at the end of class to revisit the prom court discussion, so I'll make sure to devote some time to that. A couple of housekeeping procedures, though. I sound like a broken record, but I got to keep repeating. You're working the election for me. Don't forget you've got mandatory training on Thursday. You'll miss the sea lunch portion of 5th, so go to lunch like you would normally, and then at 1 o'clock you should be dismissed down to the media center. The nice thing about having it here is we should be able to keep it a little shorter. All right, we will get out of here by 2:30 and be able to get you back to 7th period. You may not be excited about that, but I need to make sure I get back for my 7th period. No, we're going to do it in the media center. We are going to have voting machines there, so if you're working as a judge, you'll be able to see how those work and get some experience with that. But it's not going to be anything different. It's going to be the same stuff. If you've done it before, I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that it's going to be some incredible training, but it's the hoop that we have to jump through. All right? Once again, your teachers know about that, so just remember to head down. If you can't go to that, don't forget there are other options. There's training starting tonight and tomorrow are in Anderson, and then Thursday they're going to basically pack up from here and head to St. John Lutheran in Elwood. So if for whatever reason that doesn't work for you, then you could go that night to Elwood and go to that training. Any election-related questions? She's trying for your brother, actually.
I know. Just me.
Actually, the person that she's the most mad at is Cameron.
Yeah.
Kidding.
You promised her.
Anyway, it's okay. Whatever. But let's see here. We are moving forward here. I had said that next week we're going to get into civil rights, civil liberties. We're going to start dealing with those hard questions about free speech and freedom of religion and drunken driving and whether or not police officers can take a blood sample from you without your permission. It's an interesting discussion. Yeah. Long hits for Jesus. Yes. I mean, there's lots of different avenues for us to go here. I'm going to guide us in one direction, but beyond that, it's going to be basically geared and directed by you. So before we get to that, though, we have to understand how the courts work, and that's what today and tomorrow are essentially going to be focused on. Today represents the last day of notes for me.
No.
I know. That's it. Oh, this is the 5th time we've taken notes this semester, so yeah. We have not done much of this, but
They're way shorter than your history notes.
And Pruitt's notes.
Yeah.
yeah, these are not long. We'll finish up early if we can get going. So let's get rolling through this. As always, guys, I do expect that you either take them through Chromebook or through pen and paper. It's up to you. But as I always say, we do have a final. Okay, these notes, whenever we've done them, the few times that we've done them, represent the basic information that an American should know. And that's the type of stuff I put on our final. Not minute type things, but the big picture stuff. I am going to expect you to know that for that final. A lot of this will show up on that exam, right? So let's get rolling here. And we've sort of done this. We took some time with both branches, Congress and executive, laid out how they work. Same thing with the courts. And for my money, think of it like this. How often are you going to, be in D.C. and interacting with members of Congress? Not very often. How often are you going to be interacting with members of the executive branch? Maybe more than you think, but again, probably not very much. But I think every American absolutely has a very real chance that they could interact with the courts. I'm not suggesting that all of you are going to grow up and become criminals. Okay, that's not maybe some of you, but not all of you. I'm just kidding. And I'll probably pick on you, Braden. I picked on Sebastian Davis in first period, so it's probably going to be you. Maybe a little Cameron. I don't know. Maybe Cameron all the way, just for Kennedy. I don't know. But I think that you don't have to be a criminal to interact with the courts. For example, when I was a kid, Some of you, I think, have gone, how many of you here have gone up to the 1812? Several of you, yeah. So we've been on the bus together. I know I wasn't with you this year, but if you went last year, I was with you. And whenever we go up to 1812, I always like to give you, here's where Klein grew up. And there's a farmhouse on State Road 37, heading to Marion, and that's where I grew up. And my family owns most of the land up there on 37 and on all around the airport. Well, when I was growing up, the airport has these big blinking lights that warn you if you're a pilot, hey, the runway is approaching. Don't crash. Right? Which is fine. We never had a problem with that. In fact, we made money off of the airport just taking that farmland and putting lights in. Well, they decided that they wanted to extend the runway so they could bring in bigger planes. But to do that, they had to push those blinking lights essentially into our backyard. That's when we had a problem. Right? The only issue was the fear of epileptic seizures. Beep, 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 bright lights constantly. All right, so we had to fight. We had to fight the airport to keep those lights from going into our backyard. And where did we end up? We ended up in court. So you don't have to be a criminal or accused of a crime to end up in court. But I think you do need to know, how the courts work. I remember my grandparents signed with a contractor to build an addition to their house. Contractor did it, and then the addition caved in. A little bit of wind, here goes the addition. Luckily, nobody was in there. So they sued the contractor for a breach of contract. The quality of work wasn't there. Where'd they end up? They end up in court. All right? Nobody's necessarily accused of a crime, but they ended up in court. So that's why I think maybe this is one of the more important discussions is understanding how the courts work, because you never know. You may end up in court. You've got too many speeding tickets. I don't know. I pray that none of you end up in court for anything too serious, but you never know where you might end up. So we need to understand how this process works. And let's start by understanding the courts themselves. All right, we have, and I don't know if it's because it's the United States and we like to sometimes make things more difficult than they have to be, but we have 51 different court systems in the United States. You can't just have one. We have to have 51. Why that number, though? Why do you think 51? So close. One for each state and national, yeah. Yeah, don't forget the national court system, all right? So 50 separated amongst the states, and then, yes, you've got a national court system. So what I mean by this is there are state laws, and then there's a whole separate set of national laws that may be the same, may differ, but with that difference there, we've got to have some separation here. My question to you is this. Of the two, state and national, which one do you think hears the most cases?
Federal.
So what I'm asking for here, Lydia, is we got state courts, we have national court. Which of those levels, state or national, do you think hears the most cases? I've heard national. Anybody think it's states? Yeah, it's the states, and it won't even be close. States here, 99% of all cases. Now, there's a real easy reason for this. There's a lot more state laws than there are federal laws, and I think that's a good thing. I think that depending on where you live, you may need to have slightly different laws, but this is how it's going to work out. So what I want to do real quickly here is talk very quickly about the state court systems, but we're going to spend the lion's share of our time getting into the national courts and how they operate. So let's talk about the state courts real quick. And I think the easiest way to do this is through a visual, using the pyramid here. Okay. Don't worry about the stuff off to the right. Let's just look at the pyramid real quick. All right, so let's say that Brayton has been accused of a crime. So he's got to have a starting point, right? Now, most cities throughout the United States are going to have trial courts. That's where everything begins. Towns will not have this. Frankton obviously does not have a court. Okay, and thank goodness. That'd be like the most boring court ever. But Elwood has one. Alexandria has one. Believe it or not, they have a court. They don't meet all the time, but there is somebody who actually has been elected as the Elwood trial judge. Okay? But most of the trials that go through Madison County obviously go through Anderson. Trial court is where you would have witnesses called against you, where you would have evidence introduced against you. And that's where they're going to render an innocent or a guilty verdict. So let's say that Brayton has gone into Anderson, and he's gone before a trial court. Now, Brayton, you might have a jury, but you might not. There's no guarantee of a jury at the state level. I don't know if any of you, I know none of you have ever skipped school before. I thought there'd be laughter there. Anyway, I paused for laughter, but nothing there. But if you've ever been homesick, or if you skip, and you've ever seen Judge Judy, you know what I'm talking about? My grandmother, God rest her soul, loved Judge Judy. It drove me nuts. This angry Italian woman sitting up there judging you, for your dog getting loose. I don't know. But did you ever see a jury? No. Judge Judy, believe it or not, Judge Judy Scheinlin is a small claims court judge. All right, she just gets some, odd folk come through there, and television thought, hey, this would make for a great show. And can't argue with the results. She's been on television for a long time. But there's never a jury there. She makes the decision. She hears from both sides. She makes the decision. You need to pay your neighbor $25 for the hole in the fence. That's what you get. So no guarantee of a trial here or a jury here, and I think that that's an important thing to know. Let's say that Brayton has been found guilty. He doesn't believe the verdict was correct, and so he would like to appeal that decision. There won't be as many of these, right? But we do have one in Madison County. Not every county will have one, but most of the larger counties will. And there's no jury. I guarantee you there's no jury at this point. No witnesses, no evidence. This level is simply going to look below it and see if Brayton's decision had been reached in the right way. If they believe it has, Brayton, you're still screwed. You got one more shot. Okay? State Supreme Court. If you've ever been down to the Indiana State House, and have you ever been down there? I know Tristan has, a few of you. If you ever get a chance to go down there, I'm convinced. I've had the chance to visit many state houses. It's a weird thing that I force my family to endure when we go on vacation. They love it in no way whatsoever. But I'm convinced that we have one of the prettier state houses. Just really a beautiful building. And we're also one of the few in the country where we have all three branches of government in the same building. So you can go watch the State House at work, and then you can go right down the hall, and you can get to the Supreme Court chamber. It's a really neat building, really neat room. You have 5 justices in Indiana, and once again, they're going to look at Brayton's case. This gets pretty intense. When AP Gov went down in November, we actually had the chance to sit in for a Supreme Court hearing. It's 30 minutes. It's over like that. This side gets 15 minutes, stand up. They have a giant timer in front of you. Talk. The justices will ask you questions. That 15 minutes is up, you sit down. 15 minutes for the other side. And that's it. That's all they get. And you're done. And that's how they determine Brayton's guilt or innocence. All right, that one was a little awkward. I don't know if they picked that for our students, but it involved a guy who had gotten in trouble because he had pornographic images on his phone. Oh, that was a little icky. Yes, Brayton.
When we went to the state house,
Yeah.
what was that?
That is the House of Representatives.
That was
Yeah, we have a state House of Representatives. We have a state Senate. So you guys were on the House floor. Yeah. But if you had just gone down the hallway, you'd get to the Supreme Court. It's all in the same building. All in the same building. All right, now those 5 justices are going to look at Brayton's case, and they may decide, look, we think it's all good. Everything's been handled correctly. And Brayton, buddy, sorry about you. You may be in jail for a while. Unless, Brayton, you can somehow find a way that your issue involves the U.S. Constitution. Then you've got another shot. Right? But that is pretty rare. Okay, the gentleman, I'll give you this as an example, an actual real life example. When we were down there in November, The case involved, like I said, this guy that had pornographic images on his phone. And if I remember right, the question here was not, should he have had these images on his phone? I think people were pretty convinced that that was an open shut case. Question was, though, is that his phone was essentially taken without his permission, and that's how the images were found. So this became a search case, right? And the question was there enough there to conduct that search? So there is a chance that he could have made this leap from state to national. Can anybody see how he might be able to make that leap? Right? Of the Fourth Amendment. And that's how he makes that leap. That's how Brayton can make that leap. But if Brayton, if this is a case of robbery or something where there's no leap to be made there, it's going to stay at the state level. It's very difficult to make that connection, but if you can, then you can move it on to the national level. So let's talk about that national level. Like I said, this is the majority of our time. What do you notice? It's the same thing. All right? The state and the national are the same thing. In fact, the only difference here is the name. Instead of a trial court, they call that lowest level district court. All right, we have several of those. No, I won't say several. I'll think of that. We have a couple in Indiana. These are going to be, like there's one in Indy, there's one in Fort Wayne. So you're not going to, again, find one in Anderson or Ellick or something like that. Big city. The appeals level, instead of appellate courts, those are called circuit courts. Supreme Court, though, Supreme Court. You don't need to change the name there. The same thing. Brayton's case. Let's say that Brayton broke like national law. Let's say that Brayton was involved in drug trafficking. Poor Brayton, man. Hope your parents aren't watching the live stream. They're probably worried. Stephanie, it's all hypothetical, at least most of it. Anyway, but Brayton at that point would have gone into the district court level, and then, but again, if he wants to appeal, he can move up, go to the U.S. Supreme Court. All right, so let's talk about those district courts real quick. How many district courts do you think we have in the United States? There are a number of them. In the United States. 435, one for every congressional district. I kind of like that idea. That is high. We're getting closer now with Jada 72.
Give me 55.
55, 55, 55.
75.
Yeah, we're going the right direction here. Just take your time here. There's actually 94 of them. Right? Well, it's not. It's not. I'll tell you what. Okay. The easy thing to do here, right, would just to have 50. One for each state. But some states have a lot more people than others, right? So they may need to have 2 or 3 or 4. California has several of these. Wyoming, they probably get by with just one. In fact, there are 89. 89 out of the 94 are divided up among the states. That leaves 5 floating out there. So where might those 5 be? Puerto Rico. DC. Right, we got DC. We got Puerto Rico. And yes, and don't forget, we also own 2 island chains called the Mariana Islands and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Now, this is important for us to understand. Just to step on my soapbox for a second. It drives me nuts when I see people on social media talking about, well, why are we sending so much money to Puerto Rico? Puerto Rico was devastated by Hurricane Maria a year and a half ago. I mean, devastated to the point where they were without electricity for a year. A year without electricity. They had trouble getting clean food and water. And we're still talking about it. Why are we spending so much money per year? You know why? Because they're freaking Americans, man. They're every bit an American citizen as I am. And I'd like to think that if we had something like that happen here, there'd be some help. I'm good with helping them out because they are American. Okay? So, of course, they're going to have a court. Because they deserve it. They're Americans every bit as much as I am. So, of course, they're going to have a court. Folks living in Guam, Americans. The Mariana Islands, they're Americans. So, of course, we're going to give them a court of law. Got to keep that in mind. Now, here's a big difference, and this would be a star thing because I promise you this shows up on our final exam. The biggest difference between the state level and the national level here is that if Brayton goes to one of these district courts, he is guaranteed a jury. Guaranteed. Guaranteed a jury. That is a constitutional guarantee per the Seventh Amendment. Right? So I think that's a big deal. There's no Judge Judy courts at the national level. All right, these are all big courts dealing with big issues. Yes, there's going to be a jury. All right, so Brayton goes before that court. That jury determines that he is in fact guilty. Man, you're in bad shape here, buddy. So Brayton wants to appeal that. Brayton has that opportunity. There are not nearly as many appeals courts because they don't get that many cases. In fact, there are only 13 of these appeals districts spread throughout the country. 11 of them are separated by geographic region. I do want to note that Washington, D.C. does have their own. Now, let me show you a map here of these regions. I think for the most part, they make sense, right? You can see Indiana up there in District 7 with Illinois and Wisconsin. Makes perfect sense. In fact, you can probably guess where that appeals court is located. Chicago. Right? Makes sense to me. Here we got Michigan, Ohio, right? Makes sense. It's all geographic based until you get to Puerto Rico. Now, Puerto Rico is located roughly right here. Virgin Islands are right here. So the sensible place to send them would be where? Well, the sensible place would be to send them to Florida. But that's not how we do it. Puerto Ricans have to go to Boston. If you live in the Virgin Islands, you get to go to Jersey because no one understands what it's like to live in the Virgin Islands, like Jersey. Talk about a culture shock for them. Go from a beautiful, beautiful place to Jersey, which has never been accused of being a beautiful place. Yeah. But for whatever reason, that's what we do. Honestly, my guess would be just simply because they don't get nearly as many cases there as they do in Miami. A lot of immigration cases down there, but it still is a little nutty. All right, now, Brayton, let's say you head up to Chicago, and by golly, they keep that guilty verdict going, but
Yeah, they're wrong.
you got one more shot, right?
And,
You got the U.S. Supreme Court. You got the U.S. Supreme Court. So that's what I want to finish up with. Talk about the U.S. Supreme Court real quick here. We talked about these guys already, these guys and gals already. What stands out about the Supreme Court, think back to our previous discussion last week. Think back to your Article 3 assignment. What are the qualifications for someone to be on the United States Supreme Court? There is nothing. The qualifications are none yet. Yes, they must be a human being. They must be alive. And that is where it stops. My 5-year-old could be on the Supreme Court. That'd be a terrifying idea. Right? But yeah, I mean, that's the reality of being on the Supreme Court. And part of that reality is once you're there until you leave by choice or by death. It's a big deal, folks. These 9 individuals, when they make a decision, there's nothing you can do about it. We talked about that. This is power. This is real, legitimate power. And so with that being the case, I ask students every year, I expect students every year to know these 9 individuals. Right, so we're going to go through them real quick here, and I'm going to write their names over here on the board. You need to know who your Supreme Court justices are, because they may make a decision that affects you. You never know. They could. So we're going to start. We've had some changes here. This is a different list than I taught first semester. We've had some changes. But our old guy is a guy named Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas is the 2nd African American to serve on the court. He remains the 2nd African American to serve on the court. We have had 2 African Americans on the Supreme Court. That blows my mind. It really does blow my mind. Okay, so this is Clarence Thomas. Anybody know which president put him on the court? Which one? First or second? First. H.W. Bush, yes. The answer is yes to that question. So, and think about that. This guy's dead. And yet he still has a judge on the Supreme Court. This guy took the bench in 1989. I was 8 years old.
He's still going.
He's still going. Now, what's funny about him is he never talks. Literally, he's been on the bench 35 years. He has asked 3 questions. He sits there. Half the time he falls asleep. He really does. One time somebody said, Justice Thomas, are you aware that you fell asleep? I was just resting my eyes. That's the oldest trick. But yeah, he'll fall asleep. But he's old. He's really old. But he's still there.
You don't get trouble. You think he's doing it for money?
No, I don't know. It's a pretty prestigious position. I'd like to think he's not doing it for money. Money's not that good. I mean, no, you're making 6 figures, 300,000. It's not bad. I mean, I'm not saying it's bad, but it's not like he's making millions of money.
Really minus only $300.
Right? All right. And then, so Bill Clinton has got 2 judges still on the court. Let me tell you what. If you know anything about me, this is my girl. Okay. When she finally passes away, Mr. Fine's going to be. I'm no kidding whatsoever. I adore this woman. I adore this woman. Right? Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
She'll live forever, Klein.
Wait, what's her name? Ruth Bader.
If I would be okay with anyone being a vampire, somebody bite her. I mean, seriously, I love this woman. I love everything about her. I love the way that she got to the court. I mean, even if you don't agree with her decision making, you have to respect what she got through to get to that position. I mean, she lived and endured the worst sex discrimination and just fought on through it. And I just adore her. So she's a Clinton nominee, and I mean, she's 90.
Didn't they make it?
Yeah, well, they've got a couple movies about her. The On the Basis of Sex is the actual movie, but then they've got a documentary just called RBG, which was phenomenal. But I didn't think I'd get in trouble on showing here. Then you got the guy beside her, who is not as well known as he should be, Stephen Breyer. I like him because he's a joker. Like, he loves to prank people. He's the guy who will put a whoopee cushion on Clarence Thomas's chair. Not literally, he hasn't done that, but like, it would shock me. He's that kind of guy. Kind of enjoy that. And then you've got W, who has got 2 nominees that are on the floor. And they are, number 1 is this guy, John Roberts. And John Roberts is your Chief Justice. W is George W. Bush. Bush 2. Okay. John Roberts has got some Indiana connections. Like I say, Chief Justice, what does that mean? It means that he gets to speak first. It means that he gives the oath of office to the president. It means that he has an extra line on his robe. That's it. That's it. He also makes $100,000 more than the rest.
So 400,000 a year? Not that much. Not that much.
Yeah, he'll live on it. Yeah. That's a really good question. Jane asks a wonderful question. You get the star of the day, gold star of the day. Jane said, how do you become Chief Justice? Because the guy who was Chief Justice died. And so we needed a new Chief Justice. So George W. Bush said, I nominate John Roberts to be Chief Justice. Yep. Right opening at the right time.
Nominate somebody who's already on.
Absolutely.
And then you just place them.
And then don't have to
You have
get
to find a
nominated by
new
the
justice.
But after you're approved, you're named by the-
Yeah, they're named by the president, confirmed by the Senate. You got this guy. His name is Samuel Alito. Samuel Alito. Again, he's a George W. So think about that. You know, these guys are from the early 2000s. These guys are taking the court while you are still in diapers. You know, so that talks about how old some of these folks are, and how long they've been on there. President Obama has 2 nominees that are still in the court. The one on the left is the first Hispanic judge to be on the court, Sonia Sotomayor. Do not call her Sotomayor. I saw her scream at a fella for calling her that. Sotomayor.
How do you spell her last name?
S-O-T-A Mayor. Hence why the guy said Sotomayor. Sotomayor. And then you've got Justice Kagan, Elena Kagan. And she's one of the few that got to the Supreme Court without ever having been a judge. That doesn't mean she doesn't know what she's doing. She's a lawyer. In fact, her official title was that she was the Solicitor General of the United States, which means she was the top lawyer in the country. So she's got some chops there. She was also president of Harvard Law, which takes more than a smile. Elena Kagan. I would only ever have last names. All right, then President Trump has got 2 people that are now on the court. Justice Gorsuch, Neil Gorsuch.
Yeah, I keep it.
I'll turn the lights on. And then you got this guy who just recently joined the court. I'll probably still be teaching about him, when I retire. He's a pretty young guy. He had some trouble getting through the Senate.
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. There were a lot of allegations about sexual harassment and sexual assault. In fact, a couple of the women who had accused him actually came to D.C. and testified against him in front of the Senate. But he made it through. And that is Brett Kavanaugh. He famously cried during the Senate hearing. He cried because he was being attacked. Yeah. So then the best part of that part of the hearing, somebody said they watched that, was when the C-SPAN camera flipped around a couple of the senators on the committee, and they were literally sitting there like, seriously? Seriously? So that, I don't know why, but I kind of.
I think it's interesting.
That was exactly what somebody said, Jaden. That's exactly what somebody said. That's exactly what somebody said.
What are you going to do?
Exactly what somebody said. All right, the last thing here, and then we'll be done. I want to make sure that Brayton knows how he can get his case to the court, because he's in some trouble, Brayton. By the way, and some of you will appreciate this. I don't know if some of you've been to DC, right?
Yeah.
So if you were at Congress, right behind Congress is where the Supreme Court meets. And it's basically just a big room. But right above that room, if you're there at the right time, you'll hear some loud thumps coming from the attic maybe. And the sound of those thumps are basketball. About 50 years ago, some of the justices were big basketball fans. And so they cleared out the attic space above the Supreme Court room. And they set up basketball goals up there. And they call it, there's a sign and everything, they call it the highest court in the land.
Yeah, it's so awesome. I can see it.
So they're up there balling.
Can you look at it?
Huh?
Can you look at it?
No. In fact,
Yeah.
if you ought to go to this, if you ever get a chance, you're not even allowed on the floor of the Supreme Court. You can walk up, they have what they call the barn door. It literally is an old wooden gate that is right there in front. So you can walk up to it, you can look in, take pictures, but you are not allowed to walk on the floor of the Supreme Court unless you have a special escort. So that is one of the coolest things that I've had the chance to do.
Mine's in my school.
No, I had to have mine. But I had the chance to go onto the floor, and it's amazing because when you walk up to the front, they have the rostrum where you argue your case. And from where you are to those 9 people sitting in front of you would be from me to Lydia. I could reach out my hand and high five the justices at how close I am. So talk about intimidating to argue a case there. But when I was standing there, I couldn't help but be thinking that this is where like Brown versus Board. This is where they argued Brown versus Board. This is where they argued Obergefell versus Hodges, which we'll talk about next week. Some of these cases that are Roe v. Wade. Some of these cases which are huge. They, it was a neat moment. So, but anyway, Braden, here's what you got to do. So Braden is sitting. Maybe he's not sitting in jail. So let's not assume that Braden is a hardened criminal. All right. But Braden, after your decision has been made, you have 90 days, Braden. 90 days to get your case to the court. 90 days. You have to file what is called a petition, Braden. Basically, this is where Braden says, Supreme Court, please hear me. Please give me a chance. Please help a brother out. And you got a couple options here, Braden. Let's say you're doing okay. You're not sitting in a prison cell. And you've got a little bit of money. It's going to take a little bit of money, guys. It's going to take about $150,000 to have your case heard before the court. Sometimes, you can find a sponsor who will help pay the bill here, but this is a paid petition. You write it out. Please hear my case. If the court says, sure, we'll hear Braden's case, be prepared. It's going to cost you at least $150,000. Now, this is typically, these cases are typically, like a rights issue. A good example. Let me give you a good example. Real example. A couple of years ago, Obamacare was passed, right? And part of the original Obamacare package was a requirement that companies give through their insurance plan birth control coverage to women. It was a requirement. Your insurance plan had to give you that option. Well, there are some companies that don't like that. Hobby Lobby. We've all shopped at Hobby Lobby, right? Hobby Lobby is what they call a closely held business, meaning a family owns that company. And if you know anything about that family, they are very deeply religious. As part of their religious practice, they do not believe in birth control. And so they did not want to offer that. They felt that they shouldn't be required to offer that as part of their insurance package. And so they sued. They sued the Obama administration saying that this requirement violated their First Amendment. And so that case went to the court. Now, they could easily pay $150,000. That's thanks to all of you going in and buying hot glue and other school projects.
Popsicle sticks.
Yeah. Popsicle sticks. Yes, Seven all contributed like half of that, right?
Yeah.
All right. So they paid for that. The court, by the way, found in favor of of Hobby Lobby. And I thought that was probably the right decision. I thought that requirement was probably a bit high-handed. In fact, President Obama came out and said, "I agree. Looking back on it, this was probably the right decision." But let's say that Braden is in a jail cell. We can all envision this, right? Okay. Braden's in a jail cell. He can't pay $150,000. All right, you can't pay. Braden hit, another car. He can't pay $150,000. Does that mean that his case should not be heard? No. We have an option here. We call it an informa petition. Typically, prison inmates who can't afford this, but maybe have a really good question to ask the Supreme Court. Court agrees to hear your case. They will waive the fee. That's that joke. But yeah, the Supreme Court's going to waive. A great example here. I love. We get into story time with these cases. There's a great story. It came out of Florida. This is the early 60s. It involved a guy named Clarence Gideon. Clarence Gideon, not too bright. Clarence Gideon, not too, just by his name, apparently, Jay. As already surmised, he's not too bright. Unemployed, kind of a drifter. There he was. He was like that guy in town that everybody knew. Oh, there's old Clarence. There he goes. So anyway, one night, somebody broke into a pool hall down in this little Florida town and stole change out of the jukebox.
Oh, no.
This is the type of crime that would only be a big deal in a town like Franklin. Did you hear somebody broke into the jukebox at Bergen? They have a jukebox. They do. I'm glad you don't know that, but they do. Okay. But anyway, so the cops are called to pool hall, and they're investigating this major crime. And who stole the quarters out of the jukebox? And while they're investigating, somebody finds old Clarence stumbling drunk in an alleyway behind the pool hall. And they search him, and they find change in his pocket. There's our man. Because who carries change on them? So they arrest him, and they take him to court. And he says, you know, he's sobered up by then. He says, excuse me, I can't afford to have a lawyer. Could you give me a lawyer? And the court says no.
Oh.
And so he is forced to defend himself. You can imagine how well that goes. And he's convicted. He goes to prison. Here's where the story gets great. He goes to prison. He has time on his hands. And he teaches himself how to read.
You didn't even know.
He teaches himself how to write. And when he does, one of the first things that he reads, and this is a man after my own heart, is the Constitution. And as he reads the Constitution, he stumbles across that part where it says, you have the right to a lawyer. And so he handwrites a petition. It looks like my 10-year-old wrote it. You can find pictures of this online. He writes it to the Supreme Court saying, I wasn't given a lawyer. The Sixth Amendment says I should have been. Please help me out. The Supreme Court accepted it, waived the fee, heard this guy's case, and unanimously found in his favor. It is thanks to old Clarence that each and every one of us have the right to an attorney. So don't tell me that, you know, this is only big people and big cases. Sometimes it's us folks from the countryside that, you know, get involved in these little things that become a major issue. We'll learn more about Clarence next week. For now, that's it. Head to lunch. See you guys later. Thank you. I do. Oh, I had these already. Did I do with mine?